You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 239 of Arsenal Pass. This week on the pod, it is our Worlds preview show, and we're going to be talking about what and who and how and when and why will win Worlds. Those last three don't really work, Pankaj, but anyway, you get the point. This is the Worlds preview pod. This is where we talk all things for Philadelphia this coming weekend, go through from top to bottom, talk all the impacts, all the decks. We're going to continue some of the conversation we had last week about evolution and talk about some deck lists as well. So that's the plan for this podcast, Pankaj.
And we've had a pretty good streak when it comes to predictions for the past few events. I would say at least between the two of us. Disagreed, but at least one of us has gotten it right. Typically, the past few events. So let's try and keep that up.
Now we're going to get it wrong. So now that you've said it, we're going to get it wrong.
No! Don't jinx it.
Well, actually, I was looking and I was like, we kind of agree. So I feel like we're either going to nail it or we're both going to get it wrong. So we don't usually. I'm interested. I had a little peek at our predictions, and I feel like they're closer than they have been in the past.
True.
We will see. To be fair, I feel
However, we would be bringing different decks if we were playing. So, that's
true.
A bit of that.
That's true. Awesome. Well, this week in the pod, as we say, it's the Worlds preview show. If you haven't listened to one of our Pro Tour previews or Worlds previews before, particularly Worlds previews, we go a bit more in depth. We don't really follow the same format as a normal Arsenal Pass podcast, so that's out the window if you're expecting news, Command and Cookout, all those good things. We'll be back next week on the pod, but this week we're just going to get straight into it, Pankaj, I think. For those, I guess I'm going to date and timestamp this because, as always happens in the week of a Pro Tour, things evolve rapidly because you get all the best players in the world in a single city, and then things start happening, conversations start happening, rumors start floating around, information starts floating around. The keynote happens on the Thursday when players check in. If you've never been to a Pro Tour, Thursday evening is check-in. You go check in, grab your packages potentially, but you go for the keynote. You go and see everyone, and usually I would say there's three types of people on the Thursday evening at a Pro Tour. If you're playing the Pro Tour or playing Worlds, there's those that have been locked in on their deck for maybe a week or two now. They're feeling pretty comfortable. Maybe they've been jamming some sideboard plans that day or the day before. Maybe some drafts. No draft this time around. Refining a few things, right? And then I think that's maybe that's 15-20% of players often. They're pretty chill. They're there. They're chatting. They're kind of freely chatting because they're like, I'm locked in. Like, this is what I've been hearing. This is what I'm not bothered. Then you've got the players who mostly kind of now decided what they're doing. And they're probably around like 40 to 50% of players, maybe 40% of players, I'd say usually. And they've come in, they're like, okay, we've had a good couple of days of testing. I'm feeling pretty good. There's still a couple of things if I had time I would have liked to have worked out, but my deck list is mostly locked and loaded. I'm good to go. They're chatting, they're having a good time. And then there's about 30% to another 40% of players who are just pure chaos. They just come in, they're wanting to stay probably as short as possible on that Thursday because they got to go back test, they got to go back and finalize like what hero they're playing sometimes. That may or may not have been me a few times, and also what cards they're actually playing in their final list that they have to submit by 10 p.m. So they don't have a lot of time, and usually those are the ones who are just dooming, or they're like, "Have you guys heard about this? I heard about this today. Is anyone reacting to this? I've heard that actually this might be the most played hero. This," and then just goes off from there. So it's quite an interesting time to be around these players.
I was going to call you out in being in the third category if you didn't do that yourself, but I'm glad you have that self-awareness. I like to call that category the fidget spinners because they are constantly rotating between 3 or 4 decks. And one super interesting thing about this Worlds is that we have 2 constructed formats. So I think the number of people that will be fidget spinning actually just increases because I know a bunch of people who are locked in the LL deck, but not locked in the CC deck, and vice versa.
Okay,
so there's just more opportunities right now to have one of these formats where you're not sure what you are playing yet the night before Worlds. So that'll be super interesting to witness, to hear what everyone's panicking about. Because there are new things happening in LL, like as we speak. A lot of these testing houses have already started. A lot of players got in over the weekend in Philadelphia. I'm in New York right now, crashing at a friend's place, decided to catch up with some friends on the way to Philadelphia. But a lot of the players have already gathered in their testing houses and, have put their heads down and are testing 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And things are being discovered and iterated on. So this Thursday is going to be awesome to see how everything settles.
Yeah, it's always the way. So that's why I want to time and also I just quickly want to point out the one time that there was 2 constructed formats before this was Worlds, the first ever Worlds. It was Limited, Blitz, and CC. And I was locked into my decks like 3 weeks before, which is unheard of for me, funnily enough. So, but anyway.
That is wild. That's interesting lore. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Because when we actually started interacting, I think it was Worlds Barcelona, and you came into the testing, I was saying I'm on max. And then you showed up on Droma, and I was like, I see. So Hayden's that kind of player. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not even going to comment any further, to be honest. Let's just move on. So I'm trying to get better. I promise. I time and date stamped this because things do change in the week leading up, and we are currently recording on Tuesday afternoon US time, so Philadelphia time effectively, Wednesday morning my time. So there's still a couple of days for things to change, and Pankaj has probably been a little bit more connected than me on this one because I haven't been testing with a team for this one. I've been doing more of my own prep and testing for ProQuest season and for Calling Sydney casting. So I haven't done usual sort of team prep, but I also think that has enabled me just to go after the things that I'm sort of interested about finding out about, learning about, all those sorts of things. So I guess with all that said, I think let's get into it first of all, and I want to talk Worlds format, preview that a little bit, and for anyone listening who is wanting to know what is happening this weekend for Worlds and what to tune into, well, first of all, get yourself onto that live stream, watch the cast, because you will hear from Pankaj himself, plus a host of five casters. It's very. I know we've done that, I think, for Worlds once before, but this is going to be a little bit different in terms of some of the rotation and format and things like that. So I'm super excited to see what the cast looks like.
We also have more feature tables this time. So something that we have done in past Tier 4 events is we always have 2 games being covered, in a sense. There's 2 games under camera, 2 games being recorded. We don't necessarily show every game over the course of the stream. It sort of depends on timing. If one game goes really long, then we won't show the second one. But suppose the first one ends quickly, then we can also show 2 games per round, which is something that we have aimed for. But this time we have 3, and that's partly because of the top 8 being, all best of 3. So we want to cover as many games as possible. So from the beginning, we have the setup of 3 feature tables, effectively, which sort of means the games that we'll be covering, which just allows us to be a lot more fluid with, say 2 games in this round 3 were really, really good, so we can show both of them, sometimes maybe even all 3, or sometimes just one, depending on the length and quality of the game as well. But what that adds is a lot of added logistical complexity, which is where having the 5 casters helps a lot. It basically frees Sam up to go ahead and organize these things and figure out what are we going to show. Do we have time to show this? Do we have time to show that? And just takes a little bit of a burden off of him, because something that has been happening in the past is that he needs to have his fingers in all these pies while also being on the cast, and that can just be quite a little bit. So this 5 caster team, aside from just being just an amazing talent, I think, alongside obviously the production people, it's also nice that logistically the burden is eased a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that. That's super exciting. So Thursday evening keynote is not being streamed, but it will be recorded, so you will be able to watch that back. That's where all the information, and also people usually stream it. There's usually a few content creators around who will stream it. So if you the likes of a DM Armada or a Fluken Box, for instance, they'll usually have the little bootleg stream up, so you can go check that out.
It will also be published officially on the FabTCG YouTube channel. Shortly after or the day after at the latest. So you'll get the information fit pretty quickly if the Discords don't already explode, because apparently we should be expecting something really, really cool and massive. I don't know what it is. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Cool. Friday Eastern Standard Time, around midday, usually 11 a.m. to midday Eastern Standard Time. The stream will kick off. That's usually right, Pankaj, probably around 11 a.m. I would say.
We're actually going live a little bit earlier this time.
Okay, cool.
We're going live just shortly after the players start playing, and this sort of goes back to the having three tables. So, and normally we do a delayed start, right? So that we can always get by all the judge calls, or just in between rounds, people are shuffling around finding their tables and stuff, so we can cut out the dead time, if you will, for someone watching the stream. But something that's happened in the past is that because we start late, sometimes we don't get to show all the games we want to show.
Yeah, sure. That's awesome.
Because we'll be like, oh, we try and catch up to the last round live with the players, and sometimes that means we're like, oh, we actually don't have the time to show that game 2 of round 3, which is actually a really cool game. So we're actually starting just shortly after players go live, and that just gives us a little bit more leeway to show more gameplay.
So more games. That's awesome. So actually, tune in earlier. Exactly. So probably more like 10 a.m. That you'll be able to see games kicking off on the stream, which is fantastic. Friday, it says Friday. We are playing on Friday, of course, CC and LL. It is rounds 1 to 5 of CC, 6 to 8 of Living Legend, 8 rounds on day 1. And then the players come back and do it all again on the Saturday. And on Saturday, you'll be seeing round 9 to round 11 rather, as Living Legend. So we go back to Living Legend for 3 more rounds. And then the last 4 rounds of day 2 into the run to top 8 are all CC. So we've got 9 rounds of CC total, 6 rounds of Living Legend, 15 rounds at this World Championships. And then on Sunday, the big day, I love Sundays at Pro Tour and Worlds, best of 3 this time around, Living Legend and CC. And Pankaj, why don't you quickly explain how this best of 3 works, or I can, but if you want to explain how the best of 3 works for top 8, because it's a new concept, it's something that LSS and Flesh and Blood haven't done before, but we're doing for this World Championships with the double constructive format.
Okay, putting me on the spot here. Hayden didn't need to tell me I need to have that memorized, but I believe I understood how it works. So yeah, this will be a good test for me as well. So how the top 8 works is that the highest seed for the game 1 out of best of 3 gets to choose the format, or they get to choose whether they want to choose the format or whether they want to choose to go first or second. And whichever one they don't choose is what the lower seed gets to have preference on. So suppose, say, the first seed says they want to play LL for game 1, then the lower seed gets to decide whether they go first or second for that game that they play. Yep. And then for game 2, whichever format was not chosen in game 1 will be the one that's played. And the player who lost game 1 gets to choose first or second on that one.
Yes. So basically, and then you defer on the first. So if I'm the highest, maybe I'm the highest seed, Pankaj, you're the lower seed, and I get the first option. Okay, Hayden, what format do you want to play? I'm going to defer to Pankaj. Pankaj, which format would you like to play?
Yes, you can also do that, but then you're basically saying I'd rather choose. Yeah, you're basically choosing I'll choose first or second.
But the important thing is the format before you choose first or second. So if I defer the format decision to you, then you say, let's play Living Legend, and I say, right, we're playing Living Legend. Well, I defer, so now I get to choose first or second, and I'm going to choose to go first, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And then if there's a game 3, it's, I believe, the loser of game 2, once again, so game 2, the format was whatever format was not chosen for game 1, but for game 3 it's a little bit different, where the loser of game 2 gets to have that same choice as the highest seed had for game 1, where they can, as you put it, Hayden, they can defer the format choice, or they can just choose the format and then the other side gets to choose whether they go first or second.
I'm very interested to see how this works out. I'm very interested. But we will
it'll be interesting to see whether there's some sort of metagame going on. And I almost wonder, I feel like at first when I heard about this, I thought it gave an even stronger advantage to higher seed than there already exists presently. But now I'm not so sure anymore. I think it might just be a wash / like just make it even more even and less of an advantage for higher seed. So it'd be cool to see how that shakes out. Do you have a take?
Yeah, I think it's massively in favor of the higher seed, depending on how the formats shake out. And the reason for that is that I think if you think you are significantly favored in one of the formats into your opponent, you get to choose that for game 1 and game 3, in theory, right?
Yeah, but I guess my counterpoint to that is that suppose this best of 3 wasn't a thing, and you were playing that game, like you were playing that format, and you were already heavily favored.
For sure.
Well, so this actually, like this best of 3 version of it, is worse for you than in the original way, which is why I'm saying, compared to what we had before, this is a bit more of either a wash or less significant of an advantage for the higher seed.
That's fair. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yep, I agree. It's not more significant. I think it just, I guess what I'm saying is I think the higher seed is still in a very good position, I guess.
Got it. Oh yeah, of course. Higher seeds definitely has that advantage for sure. But it feels like we might have. I want to say we might have more upsets than in the past. Except 8th seed has won every single time. So maybe this is the year that breaks, right? Because all 3 past worlds, it was 8th seed won, right?
Was it for Osaka as well? Is that true? Was Gregor's 8th seed? I don't know.
Or was it every single Pro Tour? It was
the first 2. It was Alex
time.
was definitely 8th seed, and I think Hamilton was definitely Hamilton was definitely 8th seed as well. I vividly remember that, unfortunately. Yeah. Anyway, let's get into quickly. So that's the format. So very exciting. More games, as Pankaj says. Prizing, as per usual, big prize pool for the World Championships, 300,000 USD. All the PTIs down to 32nd, for instance. Gold foil legendaries, of course, for the top 8. That PT champion prize card, of course, first, alongside that 100 grand USD. But the other thing that we're adding in this year is, of course, this big chunk of World Tour points. And I thought we could just quickly pause because it's been a big old year of Flesh and Blood. And one of the things that we are not only going to decide at the World Championships in terms of the world champion, we're also going to determine the player of the year for the 2025 World Tour season. And there's still a lot to play for. So we still have 2 players who are fighting for the overall player of the year title in Brodie Spurlock and Jacob Clemens, and that is very close, even to the point of I was looking at the World Tour points. So that's the new one. Where's the old one? I have to find the old one. Basically, I think a top 8 for either would, and the other one not top 8ing, would effectively close it out for them. If they both day 2, it'll be very interesting. If one day 2's in top 16s, I think they would also... here we go. So, World Championship, for instance, 25th to 32nd. So, I think it's 11 points difference right now. Brodie's ahead of Jacob. So, Jacob would need to finish in the top 24 and Brodie to not finish in the top 32 for Jacob to win. But if you get any of these players top 8ing, that's where it gets very interesting. That's what I'm looking out for.
Also, I did just double check. Gregor did get these. And you made me doubt myself. I was like, pretty sure we've had this consistent narrative. But yes, he's 18. But yes, the World Tour Player of the Year and the regions. I think some of the regions have basically their player already locked up. But the APAC region, for example, has like 5 players that are all very neck and neck. And that's super, super cool. And then overall Player of the Year, yeah, it's definitely between Jacob Clemens and Brodie Spurlock. And it does feel like anything can happen. I mean... It feels maybe like Jacob has a little bit of the edge almost, because I think in his recent events, he's been on a bigger tear than like Brodie, but Brodie has sort of quietly just been winning, a bunch of Balhardens here and there, and is sort of still maintaining his lead on that front. But when it comes to like callings and stuff, Jacob Clemens is just absolutely slaying.
Jacob's got the momentum, I would say, but I think Brodie still has the advantage.
That's the way to put it.
11 points is still a big chunk of points in terms of, effectively to overcome that, Jacob needs to put up a performance and Brodie to do significantly less well than him. So I think, for instance, if Brodie top 16s, or let's say Brodie top 24s, right? That's 12 World Tour points. Jacob would need to, at that point, minimum semifinals to beat them. So, there's still a gulf there, I think, which is interesting. The last thing I want to shout out, because there's prizing all the way down to 3rd in each region.
Actually, before that, I think something that's also really cool, actually. Now I didn't think about this until you just brought this up regarding one of them Jacob needing to like get over the gulf. What happens if you make it to day 2, but your record isn't that good? Do you drop and play the calling instead and have maybe a bit of a higher EV when it comes to getting World Tour points on that front, where you actually maybe have a better shot hitting, say, the finals of the calling, and then getting more World Tour points that way, rather than trying to stick it out on day 2 with a not-so-stellar record? I think that's another interesting metagaming piece that our Player of the Year competitors might think about. I think typically as it goes, if you make day 2 of Worlds, you just go play day 2 of Worlds, but Player of the Year maybe switches things up.
Yeah, one thing I will say, probably an easier decision this time around, the Calling's Living Legend. So it depends how you feel about that format in terms of the deck that you've bought, I think, honestly. We
know how you think about that, so yeah.
Well, I'm not prepping for it. Just quickly as well, yes, while first is sewn up in Europe and the Americas, second and third in each region also has some nice little pricing as well. Not even that small, a few thousand US dollars as well, right? Michael Fung, Michael Hamilton currently tied for second in the Americas at 91 points. So got to break that deadlock at some point. I think they're probably very likely to be second and third in the Americas unless any of our Canadians can go on to win the Pro Tour, and I think it would only be Jimmy that could do that. If I look at Europe, where Jacob has sewn that up, it is very close though for second and third. Tommaso, Arthur Trahey, Alex Chitu, Evan Tangai, like there's Pablo Pintor. There's a lot of players who can sneak second or third potentially. And then, as you sort of alluded to, in Asia Pacific, it is all to play for, where we have 5 players, 6 points separating 5 players for first in Asia Pacific, let alone second or third, including Pudding Tam, Justin Koo, Sheree Wu, Gordon Koh, Nick Butcher. So there's still, and actually, in theory, someone like a CYK Lionel, Shoma, Yamamura, Michael Collins could actually still win if they won a world championship, for instance. So it is. I'm super excited to see how you guys handle this from a coverage standpoint, because I think as you go through the 3 days of competition, what I'm actually going to be super interested in is like, oh, where are these players from a world tour standpoint? Like, who is going to be player of the year in each of these regions? And I love this player of the year addition to the world tour. I think it just makes it even more exciting than it already is.
I think we already have a whole bunch of narratives just based on the way the points have laid out, right? So obviously, overarching narrative is, can Jacob Clemens overtake Brody Spurlock over the weekend? In the Americas, who's fighting for, the post-Brody Spurlock spot between Michael Fung and Michael Hamilton, who's going to get ahead there? The Asia-Pacific one sort of writes itself. There are 5 people competing for the top in that region. And then Europe also has, as you're talking about, the sort of second, third, fourth, fifth sort of fighting it out, with Tommaso firmly in the lead there, but Arthur Trey and Alex Chitu and Evan Tangai and Pablo Pintor, Paul Van Heysel as well, and Jason Rolfe sort of being like close enough where it's a similar gap between those players as is between like Jacob Clemens and Brody Spurlock, right? Yeah. So very much within reach for those players as well. So lots of cool narratives there already. Focus is almost certainly going to be the Brody Jacob Clemens one, and maybe the Asia Pacific one. But yeah, there's tons to talk about. And this just made me realize this is our first year of Player of the Year, right? This is the first year where this has come into effect. And I think it'll be interesting to maybe have a pod at some point just reflecting on all the new things that they've brought in this past year of competitive play, and just reflect on each of the systems and our takes on it looking back after having a full year of it, for example. So this one comes to mind. There's the ProQuest changes that come to mind. That's not a full year yet, but for end of year is a good time to like wrap all that up. There's the increased BNR stuff. There's the 0.5x LL points and all that. There's a whole bunch of stuff where when the announcement happens, we're like, ooh, we want to see how this shakes up, but I'm just not sure whether we've actually taken the time to go back and reflect on these things. And I think the World Tour Play of the Year thing is one that we should definitely go back to and like chat about after we see how it shakes out. Because again, at the beginning, there were lots of people that were concerned that this is just a race for the world travelers, for the people who can actually take the time to travel every weekend, for example. But I think the way it's shaken out, maybe it leads itself a little bit to the narrative as well. But I think there's also a lot more players that are in the running who don't travel for the game that way. And I think that's really exciting. And it'll be interesting to talk back and reflect on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been wanting something like this for a very long time, to spotlight more narratives on players in our game. I think it's what draws me into other sports, other card games, is the fact that we can highlight talent and you can follow storylines and narratives. And I think that is such a, personally, I love stories. I love sharing stories, I love hearing stories. And I think this has just changed the game a little bit, but there is a lot of other things as well, which I think we can dive into. But we have to keep going, because otherwise we're not going to finish this pod, because there's a lot to get through. So I want to move on to players, teams to watch, and for us to just shout out a few, I guess, different players, different teams that you think, or we think that players should keep an eye out for. We've already spoken about the World Tour Player of the Year, but we can maybe just quickly touch on some of those players that we might want to, I guess, keep an eye out for various reasons. I want to start with, thank you, Pankaj, for calling this out, previous Worlds winners. We have 3 previous Worlds winners in Michael Hamilton, Alexandros Areu, Grzegorz Kowalski. Obviously, 3 previous world champions to watch out for. I assume that Michael and Grzegorz are definitely there. Alex, I don't know. I think he's come to some events, not played others, so we will see. PT winners, Pablo Pintor this year in London, of course, and then our Singaporean champion Shireu as well. So two players who also, Pablo has been a little bit quieter since London, which is, that's always scares me when Pablo is quiet, when you don't see calling top 8s and things from Pablo. Usually means he's in for another big top 8. And then Shireu was in Sydney, and I know has been playing a few different callings where possible to chase down this Player of the Year race as well, like we spoke about.
Yeah, last I heard, I'm not sure if Shireu is coming to Worlds. I think he was still in the midst of figuring that out. When I was in Singapore and I went to that Pro Quest, I was asking people, I had to pass something to him, and I think what I heard last was that he might not be coming, but I hope things get figured out. I think he has exams during it. Like he started his undergrad right after winning Pro Tour Singapore. I think he might have exams during that time period, but hopefully he makes it out, because that would be awesome. So those players that you shouted out, previous Worlds winners, Pro Tour winners. But I think we both want to talk about some players who we feel might have the momentum or might just be on a tear or due that tier 4 top 8. Should we start getting into those?
Yeah, I can kick us off. I think someone that I watched over last weekend and I've always consistently been impressed with their play. And I think, they're right. I think they're not in there for the World Player of the Year race, as it turns out now for Asia Pacific. But they're a player who has had multiple calling top 8s, has been on the cusp of other big top 8s, and that's Peitung Liao. And I think LPT is just one of the better players, I think, consistently. And, I think I would back to make a top 8. So off the back of the calling top 8 in Sydney, I'm just curious to see what's next for LPT.
This isn't very hipster take, but I have my eyes on Jacob Clemens for sure. I think the tear that he's been on this year is extremely impressive. I mean, it's not just momentum, it's consistency. Mm-hmm. Pretty much since the start of this year, when we started seeing him travel to all these events, like every other weekend, I know I'm calling somewhere, and it's like, oh, Jacob Clemens made top 8 again. Or he went X2 Submarine into top 8. I think that happened one of the callings as well. So my eyes on him for sure, and on top, I mean, obviously that's on top of the way he caught up to Brody in the Player of the Year leaderboard, I think speaks for itself, right? Brody was so far ahead of everyone else to the point where it felt like it was already locked up that Brody's going to win it. And the fact that now we have a competitor in the question itself just speaks to what he has achieved this year. And he's sort of the first person I'm looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd be remiss not that I want to dwell on it, but Brody was obviously unable to play certain events for a period of time this year while serving his ban. And I think that is something that, I think is going to come up to the forefront again if Brody wins this World Tour Player of the Year race. I think it's inevitable that players will talk about a player who has served a ban in the World Tour Player of the Year race a year, potentially going on to win the Player of the Year. I think it's just going to be a conversation either way, no matter where you stand on that conversation. But one thing I at least want to point out in this pod is that it's pretty insane the amount of points he was able to rack up pre and post, right? And so I just think it's so close. Jacob has the momentum, but Brody has just also been putting up just some insane. He's gathered more points from Battle Hardens, but Alex, I think, has 4 calling top 8s this year. It's definitely 3, almost top 8 3 in a row. So it must be 4 now, which is just insane, honestly.
Any other players you want to bring up?
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk about, just before we speak teams, Arthur Trahey. I think Arthur Trahey is... Personally, I think Arthur is the best player in the world. And that might be a bit of a hot take, I think, because obviously you've got the Pablo Pintors, the Michael Hamiltons. But just having watched Arthur play, and of course Arthur did top 8 in Singapore, so already has a PT top 8 this year, was my pick to, my call when we were on the pod famously to win London. And we interviewed him actually in London. And his teammate on the exact same A ended up winning the event, right, in Pablo Pintor. But just every time I watch Arthur play, I just am sort of amazed about how he thinks about the game, the way he sees the game, the lines he plays. I think just from a player's perspective as well, someone who, has played at the highest level, and Arthur is just next level. It's just, it's just insane. So not that there aren't players who are very much in and around that conversation. I just think Arthur's playing the best flesh and blood right now from what I've seen.
Well, it wouldn't be me making a prediction for a tier 4 event or even a tier 3 event if I don't put up a member of Blue Pitch there as my pick to win the entire thing. Unfortunately, Alanau and Xing Sang have both been gobbled up by LSS and won't be able to compete anymore, but I'm still going to put forth Pudding Tom as someone I'm going to keep an eye on as well. There is a ninja at the top of the metagame right now, and Pudding Tom, in my opinion, is just one of the best, if not the best, ninja players around. He made top 8 at Calling Sydney as well, and just watching the guy play ninja is so compelling, and it's so great when we see the guy playing ninja. I feel like he understands the hero and the class at an extremely deep level, and given ninja's prominence in this, at least the CC meta, I'm not sure what he's playing in LL, but there are ninja-esque heroes in LL that I'm sure he's able to find. Could be Zen. But yeah, he's another one I'm gonna be keeping an eye on. Always, I need a member of Blue Pitch to like root for and keep an eye on, because I think that team is somehow criminally underrated, at least by maybe the casual player base.
Yeah.
I think the top players know, but like the casual player base, maybe a little bit less. I think that they're due a tier 4 top 8. Like they have been due for years.
They've got so many tier 4. That's the crazy thing, is they've got so many tier 4 top 8s and top 16s, but they've just lost Alan and Xing, right? And I think that's maybe why they're being a little bit underrated, which is crazy, because Pudding also just top-aided a calling, like you say. I mean, I'm surprised, you've got another compatriot who's also on a very good run as well in Gordon Coe, right? In terms of, I think, is just, World Tour leader in APAC, and also come off a calling top 8. Did he win Nationals this year as well?
I don't know. I don't think he won Nationals.
Okay. But he has won before, twice, I believe, Nationals, so...
Yeah, he's also he's been a little bit, again, it's a little similar to the Blue Pitch thing, where I feel like the top players, like the teams and stuff, are like talking about him and like know of the things he's doing sort of like secretly, in a sense. It's not really secretly, but it's not as forefront as like, I don't know, these other mainstay names, right? Like the Michael Fungs and Michael Hamiltons. But yeah, he's been secretly simmering and racking up those Pro Tour points as well, and doing really, really well. Obviously, just came off the back of Calling Sydney. So you talk about momentum. The most recent Tier 3 event that we've had, he did win, and there were lots of very strong players at that event, right? There's obviously the Travelers, but
it was stacked.
As it typically is, the Tier 3 event just before a massive Tier 4 event, there are lots of strong players showing up, and he did, take them all down and walk away with the win. So yeah, Gordon Coe as well.
I mean, that's
got to be someone to look out for.
That's the crazy thing, right? Is we've obviously had two. We haven't had Shoma Yamamura was our first, Pro Tour winner from Asia, right? It's been a lot of US and America, and Worlds has been won by 2 Europeans and an American. I think what's interesting for me is, I think players are underrated in the Asia region because they get less screen time in some ways. They're on less sort of like podcasts and things like that. But, another player like that is Peitang Liao, right? Like LPT is one of those players who I think is just criminally underrated, and people just don't know who he is. But it's just one of, I think Chu Hing was in that bucket a few years ago, right? Of like, don't know who this person is, but like top 16. PT Leal was consistently on the fringes, and just these players that are consistently very good. So there is a few of those, and I think the World Tour race is highlighting some more of these players. Blue Pitch as a team has helped highlight some of those players, but I think there's so many more out there that are very, very good.
That's a very great point, actually. The content creator space doesn't actually have a lot of players from the Asia region, and that's perhaps why it's leading to the casual player base just being not as aware of these players' skill level and just their frankly amazing results.
Yeah. Quickly, you want to shout out 3 teams to keep an eye out from. From my perspective, feel free to add any Pankaj. I'm sure these will probably be featured teams that you'll see on stream anyway. But the Super Armory, of course, you can't go past them. That's, of course, the Pablo Pintor, Michael Hamilton, Michael Fung, Brody Spurlock, Jacob Clemens. I mean, list goes on. After Hayes on that team as well. There's a few new members, including Evan Tanguy, I think, on that team. So that team just continues to have the best players in the world on it consistently. And it's not a huge team either. It's 10 to 12 players, I think. So, but 10 to 12 are the best. Value Vampires, if we're speaking about some of the best players in the world, or as I call them, the wolf pack of Europe, quite a large team, that One Valley Vampires. I think they must be 40, 50 players at this point because they've got some players in Canada as well. But again, some very, very strong players, including Pro Tour London finalists Patrick Diekman. Did I get that right?
I forgot the name off the top of my head, Hayden.
I'm pretty sure. But
no, it's Max Diekman. No,
Max Diekman. Sorry, not Patrick. Sorry, Max.
Diekman's the name.
I've met Max before as well. I apologize, Max. And then also players like Tommaso, of course, out of Italy, who's running in that European race as well. So lots of players on the Valley Vampires there. And then I'm going to shout out PCG Invasion, of course. 2 top 8s in Pro Tour London. Had a tough Pro Tour Singapore, but I'm backing the boys. They've put a lot of prep in for this one, so excited to see how they show up. And again, you've got the likes of Tarek Patel, Matt Rogers coming off a calling top 8 as well. Nick Butcher, of course. Lots of different very strong players in that team as well. Evan Herndon, Michael Yazka, Sean Dhaliwal.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to shout out Blue Pitch, obviously, because it wasn't on this list for some reason. But yeah, Blue Pitch definitely. The team, I just have such a soft spot for them. And the team that I test with the most, Stroop Waffles. We have, Jimmy Nguyen, who top 8'd Singapore very recently, is also part on the leaderboard very much. We have likes of Marjan Bay, who's US national champion, and many other very, very strong players. It'll take me a while if I name all of them. But yeah, it's have them. And I'm also going to shout out Runaways because I enjoy their content. So we'll be looking out for them as well and cheering for them.
I'm gonna put I think Runaways are due a result, right? They should. I'm looking forward to them putting out something. So this is issuing a challenge for come on, Lucas, go on top 8 a world championship. Let's do it. I want to move on to formats, and we're going to cover a little bit of CC and Living Legend. Talk about the shape of this format, and also going to talk decklist briefly as well. So I want to do a quick check-in from the final week of ProQuest season and the 2 battle hardens that we had over the weekend in Edinburgh and Rochester, I believe. I had to laugh because Marjan Bay did, of course, World Tour Weekly, and someone didn't put the pronunciation of Edinburgh down for Marjan Bay, so fat L for LSS for that one. But and I digress. Final week of ProQuest season, Gravy Bones 7 wins. Arachne Marionette 7 wins, Syndra 7 wins, Verdant 6 wins. The 4 top decks of the final week of ProQuest season. Pankaj, what do you read into the final week of ProQuest season?
The Gravy coming back on top kind of just shoots the theory that we had last week into the ground. Remember our theory of why Gravy wasn't doing so well as the weeks went on? It's because maybe it's the best players have already won, and then the Gravy is a difficult deck, so he doesn't do so well. And now he's back at the top, so that whole theory is just shot. It's completely irrelevant. We still have the loose narrative of the Gravy Syndra Verdants all hovering in that sort of top region, and the overall wins across the ProQuest season do reflect that as well. Marinette, Kasai, Florian. I don't understand these decks' angles. I'm not entirely sure what's happening here. And I remain skeptical. This is weird. It's weird to look at data and still sort of not believe these heroes' power or strength. No, they are powerful heroes. Just their place in the metagame with respect to the other 3 meta warpers, if you will, in the form of Gravy, Verdants, and Syndra. I'm just not seeing Marinette's, Kasai's, and Florian's metagame angle into those 3 specifically. So despite the data being presented this way, and it's obviously a bit of a cardinal sin to look at data and be this seems wrong, I'm still not seeing the vision for these heroes as we lead into the World Championships. But do you have thoughts on them?
I think Marionette has a place. Is it a good place? I'm not sure. We'll talk metagame predictions at the end of this pod in terms of, as we always do for these tier 4 events, make our predictions. But I do think that I am more solid on what those next 3 are, the decks after Syndra, Verdant's, Gravy Bones. And to me, that is Prism, Dash.io, and Arachne Marionette. And I think I'm fairly confident that those are going to be the 6 of the 7 most played decks, with KO being the other in there, I think. I don't think Kasai is one of them, though, and I definitely, for a fact, know Florian is not one of them. So that's probably where my mind sits right now. I just quickly on those top 3 results from this past weekend. Gravy Bones coming back, to your point. I am expecting an uptick of Gravy Bones for Pro Tour to maybe what we have potentially thought, but not more than, say, was relative to what we saw on Calling Sydney, for instance, where it was the third most played deck. I think it will be the third most played deck, but I don't think it'll be... I think it'll be a little bit of a drop-off, which we'll talk about in our predictions, but I think it'll be Syndra Verdance. It'll be like Syndra Verdance as a group of 2, then Gravy, and then the group of the next 4, I think is how it'll look in the PT, I think. At Worlds, rather.
I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And in terms of the following 3 heroes after the Syndra Verdance Gravy pile, if you will, I'm with you on Prism. I'm with you on Dash.io. I am
not
unsure. Well, so I think, to your point, I think Marinette, like amongst like Marinette, Florin, and Kasai, I do think Marinette has the most compelling angle compared to the other 2. But I also have Acilio there, and I'm not entirely sure between Acilio and Marinette which one of the 2 wins out. Because at least on the surface, I find Acilio's angle into Gravy and Verdance a lot more compelling. Whereas Marinette does feel like maybe they have a bit more of a flatter spread, but it does let them play into all 3. Whereas Acilio into Syndra is just kind of miserable.
I think Acilio's just dropped off a bit for me, honestly. If you asked me last week, I'd be like, Acilio's going to be the 4th most played deck at PT. And now I'm like, I'm not even sure it's top 7. Like, I think it might be the 8th most played deck. So, it's been a big... Like, I actually think Arachne might be more represented than Acilio, which is not something I would have said a week and a half ago, honestly.
I could see it, and I think KO as well seems to be like might be more represented than Acilio as well. But the power level of Acilio, I think the unique angle he has, I think still makes him quite compelling. I wouldn't be surprised to see Acilio do well. Like if I had to guess whether there is a dark horse that makes it into like top 8, and if I had to guess between like Acilio and Marinette, I would put Acilio there first, I guess. Despite I think the representation maybe being higher for the Marinette.
I think the uptick of Marinette is definitely not good for Acilio, though.
True.
So that's a check-in on latest. If we just take a look at the battle... quickly, Battle Hardens, actually. Yes, Battle Hardens this past weekend. Rochester and Edinburgh, both won by Syndra. So Syndra really ticking up some Living Legend points, and I guess also just ticking up the fear in players' minds and hearts as they enter into Philadelphia with 2 more Battle Harden wins, plus a calling win in the last 2 weeks.
Do you think there might be a gulf between Syndra and Verdance as well?
And representation?
In representation, yes.
Let's get to that in the pod. Let's get to that in our predictions. I think I might chat about that a little bit.
Got it.
You can go back and listen to pre-week 1 of ProQuest season where I said I think Verdance is the best deck in the format, and I have not really. I would say that I felt mostly the same all the way through, except that I think that Syndra has probably gotten a lot closer as we went through. Like at one point, I think it was like maybe Syndra's better than Verdance. It's really close. I think it's really close. I think that I would give the edge to Verdance ever so slightly, but I think Syndra might be a better pick for the PT.
I'm kind of the opposite. I feel like I've gotten lower on Verdance as the weeks have gone by, particularly as we expect the metagame to narrow, for a tier 4 event, and that makes Prism's angle a little bit more compelling. I think Verdance does have... she gets to play the game into Prism. It's not like previous Wizards into Prism where you just cry and go get lunch. That being said, I still wouldn't really want to play Verdance into a field where I'm expecting a decent number of Prisms and Gravy Bones. And the Syndra matchup isn't as amazing as, I'd like it to be as well. It's like, again, it feels like it's a whole bunch of games I'm allowed to play, but not I'm happy to see this when it comes to a narrower metagame at something like a tier 4 event. So Verdance for me... I'm feeling lower on. That being said, if I were playing this event, I would still play Verdance, but that's just because that's the hero I'm most comfortable with out of these other ones, and the hero that I enjoy playing the most. But her place in the metagame, as we expect the metagame to narrow, because she has a lot of raw power for sure, but I feel a lot of the raw power, you sort of feel it when you're playing into a wider field, like when you're playing into a random warrior, or like a Florian, or a KO or something. Then I'm like, Verdance feels really, really good. But when I'm playing into the other top decks as Verdance, it can feel a little bit demoralizing, which is why I like my take on it. It's like reduce a little bit. I still definitely expect it to be second most represented, though.
Yeah, I think exactly my point. Best deck in the format, but not necessarily the best pick for this PT, I think. Most powerful deck in this format, not necessarily the best pick for this format, I think, is where I've landed. I want to point something out about Prism, because I think, we'd be remiss not to talk. We've kind of said about those tiers, and we'll talk about our predictions of heroes that will win, do well. I was watching Smurf, Kevin Murphy, who has been invoked in this pod a number of times recently, and also by myself on the cast for the wrong reasons, accidentally accrediting an event to him that wasn't won by him. I was watching he did a replay analysis of one of the Calling Sydney games, and it was Prism versus Verdance, and he opened up by saying, traditionally one of Prism's best matchups might now be unfavored. And that is directly from one of the premier Prism players in the world saying he's not sure that it's necessarily favored anymore. So I do have this feeling that Prism is in a good spot, to your point about meta narrowing. But if Prism players and dedicated Prism players, maybe they can adapt, right? Maybe it just takes some tweaking of lists. But if they don't feel that they're favored into Verdance, that's a real shot through the heart for Prism for this World Championships, I think.
And that's a very recent iteration as well. It just goes back to what we were talking about in the previous week's pod, where these lists are evolving significantly as we lead up to the World Championships. It's not just a couple of cards changing here and there, but very differently in that Pulsing Aether is now fully cut, and instead they're running red Autumn's Touch and red Fighting Spirit, which definitely makes Prism's life a lot harder. And then can they adapt? And then I'm almost like, if the Verdance need to adapt even more, they do have access to channel the Tranquil Domain. But then Verdance does feel like it feels like she needs a fair number of pieces. Yeah, exactly. It feels like she has a bunch of these mashups where she needs a fair number of pieces to make them good for her, but then how can she fit all of them, right? Into Gravy, you want a whole bunch of these small blue attacks, and maybe can even ping something on the side, something like Blue Sirens of Safe Harbor. Fighting Spirit sort of does that, but in the red slot, but you want more of those. And into Prism, you need these 7 power stuff, and maybe channel the Tranquil Domains to actually make it very good for you. And can you fit all of that in? And I think that's the real tension on Verdance, but yeah, you're right. The matchup isn't as good for Prism as it used to be because of the 7s.
It's the Adventure Extraordinaire problem. You can't fit it all in. If you had 90 cards, best deck in format, no questions asked. I want to look at...
Well, I don't... Every time people say that, I'm not so sure, because the other side is 90 cards too. And I feel like...
No.
No.
That's not the point.
Well.
That's not the point.
Yeah.
Only that hero gets to have 90 cards. That's the point.
Let's
move on. Right. Quickly, but I guess ProQuest overall season wins. Syndra won 18% of ProQuest, Verdant 17%, so very close between the top 2 decks in the format there. Gravy 11% of wins, and then it drops down. KO 7%. 5% for Florian, Acilio, Kasai, and Dash.io each. So kind of really the story of the format as we spoke about it. Just the one deck that we haven't, or hero we haven't spoken about that I want to shout out is Kano. Kano is still not Living Legend, and I think is a very real consideration in terms of whether that's for playing it at World Championship, or at least having a plan or having sideboard slots for Kano for this PT, for this World Championship. So do just want to point that out. Kano is still around and kicking, that's for sure.
984 points for our OG wizard, and I actually think the hero that suffers the most from that might actually be Marinette, because
good point.
They are the ones that sort of need to dedicate 3 AB Spell Void slots to it, whereas Prism doesn't need to do much. For example, Verdance is Metacarpus node, but you're always gonna have Metacarpus. Alluvian. Yeah. Alluvian's probably the one, but because the mirror is as relevant as it is, you're just gonna run Alluvian Metacarpus node anyway.
Yeah.
You're not adding anything for Kano. Syndra already wants Spell Void Dagger. Maybe Spell Void Boots is something that is a bit of a Kano hate piece, but it's one piece, for example. Whereas Marinette feels like they need to dedicate they would always need at least 1 AB, so an extra 2 because of it. And I think the assassins will suffer a little bit.
I think Verdance
a strong wizard being around.
I think Verdance suffers the most, actually, because I think, and we'll talk about this right now, I think Verdance lists cutting potions. And if you don't have the Rampant Growth potion plan against Kano, I think you are a massive dog in that matchup.
So we disagree on this. I think if you don't have the potions plan in the mirror, you are not a massive dog, but I do think you are unfavored. And I could be very, very wrong on that. But yeah, I do feel like if I'm on the Verdant side and I have potions and my opponent doesn't, I feel like I'm in a favored position, and it is my game to lose.
So let's get into it, because we've got maybe 20 minutes to rip through this. So let's get into deck lists for the World Championship. Why don't we start with Verdance? And
we're already there.
Yep, all these lists will be in the descriptions below. So if you're an audio listener only, you're not following along with us on YouTube, that's fine. You can go and check these deck lists out. Links are below. These are effectively... Pankaj put a challenge out to me. Last time we did this, I was playing the World Championships, obviously, but I've put together the deck list that I think I would play if I was to play any of these 4 heroes that we're going to talk about at the World Championships. And as you said, we'll start with Verdance. And I'm not going to go through the whole list, because you can go and click on it and find the link, or if you're watching on YouTube, you will see it pop up on your screen in just a moment. But just, I guess, to give the gist is that I think I would be looking at a list very similar to what we saw from the likes of Matt Rogers' top 8, the Calling in Sydney recently, Jacob Clements we saw on stream as well, playing a very similar list in terms of some of the choices of red attack actions and moving away from some of the traditional things we've seen from Verdance, focusing very much on playing almost like a bull lander sort of approach right to value, where I would definitely be playing Fyendal's Fighting Spirits in my list. I would be on 3 of those. I would be on the 3 red Autumn's Touch. I think that card is just fantastic. It's a 7 power red attack action that is Earth, that blocks 3, that also you can use to overpitch into your Millennium Tree for certain turns to keep that around for longer. So I think it kind of just does everything you want it to do. I would be on the 3 Scar for a Scar, definitely, plus I think the Pursuit of Knowledge is the tech we saw in Sydney, right? That just really changes that gravy matchup in a big way. So yeah, that's kind of what I'd be looking at. Plus those still more pieces of those life gain, along with the 3 Channel Millennium Trees, in the form of... I have 2 Sigil. I couldn't fit 3 in Sigil into my list when I was looking at this. There were just too many things I wanted to fit in, because I wanted the Balance of Justice and the Crown of Providence. But yeah, this is the list that I would, if I was going to play Verdance Pankaj. But I know you would be on Potions and Rampant Growth life. So my question would be, what do you not play to fit those cards in? Because I think the Verdance deck lists are just so tight right now.
Yeah, this is... So... Shout out this deck list. I think it's a very fantastic starting point. And I think
that's the biggest backhanded compliment I've ever heard.
What? No. Sorry, that came out wrong. What I mean is, it's a very strong deck if you're not playing the potion side of it. I guess sure. I'm curious about running Sigils without Rampant Growths. What would be my take? I feel like I've seen that card as... part of an engine to do a mini combo at some point in the mid game, which involves Rampant Growth. So I guess you're looking at it more as like a casual paying off, like a 1 health ally, maybe potentially against Gravy, or what's the purpose of Sigil of Solace without Rampants?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sigil of Solace, these 2 are the cards that I would potentially walk away from what you just spoke about, which is having access to these cards for... you saw Jacob, I think, use them to good use in the Prism matchup, for instance, of just keeping that life total high, so you can effectively run them low on threats and then just start to throw damage at their face. Obviously, end game or mid to late game pings, where you get to throw the 3 life for value and ping off allies, like you said, while keeping your life total high against the aggressive nature of Gravy. But I think these could also be something like we saw Matt playing Outed in his list, for instance. We saw different iterations with more Evergreens, for instance, more Decomposers. So there is, if you look down at my potential list of cards that I would look at playing, you could be thinking about Yellow Rootbound Carapace potentially as well, if you want those other forms of decomposing. Or like you just said, you could be looking at trying to then fit in your Rampant Growth life package, if you can. But I think you want Sigils at that point, and you probably want pots. So you're trying to fit in an additional 7 cards. And I guess that's where I come back to is what 7 cards do you not play? Do you not play Fyendal's Fighting Spirit? I think if you don't play Scar for Scars and Pursuit of Knowledges, I don't know how you beat Gravy.
Yeah. I think I don't think you need Sigils with Rampant Growth. I think if you have the potion stuff, then you don't... If you have all the potions, You don't really need the Sigil. So I would cut the Sigils. But I do want to talk about some things that I think I would really like to fit into a Verdance list. The first one being Pursuit of Knowledge that you called out. I think one of Verdance's biggest problems in the Gravy matchup is Sawbones, and Pursuit of Knowledge is a fantastic answer for the card, because it also gets through a Fearless Confrontation on top of the Sawbones prevention effect, where something like Outed doesn't. Mm-hmm. And then you draw an extra card, obviously, to help you block a little bit more, because one of the ways that they get very far ahead is like on a Prismatic Leyline turn, and typically, and if they can also line up like a Conqueror, and just being able to have an extra card to honestly to block in that matchup. It's funny how much Verdance actually doesn't mind or like wants to block in that matchup, and just having an extra card to do that after you cleared an ally as well, and cleared an ally in a way that gets past Fearless Confrontation, I think was very innovative from Matt Rogers there, and that's something I definitely would like to fit into my Verdance list. I do like the cutting down on Scours as well. I think with Florin's sort of exit from the metagame, if you will, and also the fact that Fangs are scared of this card already and so aren't showing up. I think those are the matchups that Scours are most strong. You can go down in this card. I wouldn't go down to a full 0. It does have some niche applications, like in the mirror, if they get an early ring, you can Scour it. Or into Syndra, if like this is your best play, you Scour Butcher the field teeth, which can give you a bit of value later on. Yeah, and Prism as well. So I wouldn't cut down fully, but I do like the trimming of it, for example. Yeah, so I think where I think that the things I question, if you will, would be, I think I do like 3 red tilling. Very, very much, because I think especially into Syndra, it's very important that your first felling actually comes in for 8, and cutting down on decomposers, you really feel the strain on that end. Of course, this it depends on I do feel like we've maybe gone up on blue 2 blocks a little bit with the Pursuits, unless the Pursuits don't come in that matchup. The additional 2 block strain is definitely felt in the Cinder matchup the most. So that's where the Tillings can maybe feel a bit ox, but I would like 3 Tillings. And then I think the Evergreen can actually be blue. Have you seen that? There's just like one blue Evergreen.
I think it's bad. I tried it and played it. I thought the blue was just pointless. I was just like, I think this needs to be red. Personally,
that's fair. I guess what we found is that we never actually come down to the end state, even against like Jarl or Florin. But actually, you know what the difference is? It's because when we've played those, we have potions.
Yeah.
And when we have potions, rampant growth, the blue Evergreen is really just as like, if there's some like weird Reaping Blade Florin thing that doesn't want to play the game into you, then you're like, okay, you have guaranteed this is not inevitable. I have a weapon effectively, and that's kind of all we needed it for. Because otherwise a potions combo, usually against a Jarl Florin, you just get there anyway. So I guess that is a difference. If you don't go the potions route, you maybe want the more evergreens as you were talking about.
Cool. I think we can probably move on there. So, yep, this is the list that I put forward. Pankaj thinks we'd try and fit potions and rampant growth in. I mean, I do think there's a place for potions and rampant growth. I do think it significantly improves your Kanan matchup, for instance. I think for me, I think a lot of people are going to come to potentially play it for the mirror. My experience was that it's not super impactful in the mirror, and that Channel Millennium Tree and the value attacks were more important, but I can see it. It's hard. It's just hard to fit everything in.
Yeah, it's really hard. I think what we found is that, exactly what I said earlier. If I recognize the other person doesn't have potions, like they haven't started setting them up, I feel like I'm in a good position to close out the game. Like, there's just inevitability with the potions, whereas on the other side, it feels like it's a little bit more volatile. I think the other thing I would say about the potions is that it just insulates you from a whole bunch of matchups, which are definitely matchups which people shouldn't bring to Worlds, but there will be some people who bring it to Worlds. And I'm talking like that Fatigue Jarl that's going to show up, right? Or like that Degenerate Deny Redemption Florian type list, right? Where they sort of just make you have the combo. They sort of sideboard check you in a sense. And if you don't have the combo, I do think you lose those matchups, is the thing. Like, the Evergreen isn't quite enough to get over the fatigue of a Jarl, for example.
I just think in the World Championships, you just can't be worried about that sort of thing. You've just got to hope that you win round 1, and then they'll be gone anyway. I don't know.
That's fair. I guess we just found that even if you say there's 10% of the room is like this weird degenerate fatigue thing, and then there's gives you the edge in the mirror, I think to us is a little bit more, it's quite compelling to try and fit the potions in, but I do agree with you that it's just so incredibly hard to fit, and you have all these 7 powers which just feel so good in so many matchups.
So this is why I wouldn't play Verdance, I think, is basically the fact that you are having to make some calls because of the potential meta game and what players may or may not do against you. And I think this is ultimately, I think that I want to play a deck that is streamlined, powerful, and that's why I think that I don't like the sort of potions package, and the fact you have to make some concessions to other matchups when I just want to be as clean as possible. And I think that's why we'll move on to Syndra. I think that where I would be looking is to basically I would play Syndra, and I think that while I think Verdance overall is slightly more powerful, I think Syndra is in a really strong spot for this event, and I think that's because players are thinking about how they respond to Verdance, whereas not that they're not thinking about how they respond to Syndra, but I just think it's a lot harder to respond to Syndra, to be honest. And I think these Syndra lists have become so clean, they're more consistent, And yeah, that's where I would land. So I will throw up the Syndra list that I would play. This is again the deck list I think I would play at the World Championships if I was making my way there.
Awesome. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts on the starters and enders. I mean, that's really where the Syndra lists are diverging, right? Like everyone's now on like the Rabbles and the cut-throughs. And are you on Pain in the Backside? You're not on Pain in the Backside. Okay, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that card. And also the enders. I think the other place where we've been seeing a lot of flux is the number of Oaths of Loyalty, because that card can be so incredibly awkward. While it's like really strong, can be really awkward when you do it into the field. It's a terrible mask draw. It's so bad when you draw out of mask or off your Ancestral Empowerment, for example. So that card being trimmed we're seeing that happen more and more. And then the chain enders, right? So you've got like 2 Hunt the Hunters, for example, and you are running all 3 copies of Outer Dragon Scale, which I know some people are being contentious on. So let's start with the starters. I'm going to start with Pain in the Backside. Actually, let's start Pain in the Backside. Where you, I mean, clearly you don't have it in your list. What about, I guess, why you're not convinced on the card?
I'm convinced on the card. I think the card is very good. I think the card was a lot better in the last few weeks, and I think the card for the World, I think it's, when it was I think players were struggling to understand how to play against Pain in the Backside, because it's the perfect first chain link, right? In terms of you play it on chain link 1, you ask your opponent to block it or you get value. I think what players have adapted to is understanding that this is a 0 for 4. You cannot afford to...
You're supposed to let it hit.
You're supposed to let it hit basically every single time. The reason that Pain in the Backside is so strong, I think, is not because it's a 0-4, because it allows you to trigger the ability to vest, right? To Bloodsplatter vest, without sort of the risk of flicking a dagger at a time when you don't want to, or your opponent potentially having shelter, for instance, all these sorts of things. I think that's actually the strength of Pain in the Backside, personally. In terms of just being a chain link 1/0/4, yeah, that's obviously good, but there's a lot of downsides to this card as well. It's not Draconic, which is a massive cost in this deck, and I don't think Pain in the Backside is actually very good in the mirror, and I think that it is good against Verdance, but I think it's becoming less important, and I think against Gravy it's fine. Against Marionette, for instance, I don't particularly like the card. So I think what I have focused on is players now understanding this card a lot more, and while I think this card is good, I think it's hard to fit it into the list, because we can talk about some of the other slots that I want to have, and instead I think that I want consistency of having as many Draconic cards as possible, plus payoff cards, as opposed to, I guess, a card like Pain in the Backside. So you spoke about the 3 out of Dragon Scale. Yeah, I think this card is just the best card in the mirror, and I don't think it's particularly close. I think this card is also very good in a number of other matchups, and so I want to be able to make sure that I can use my my fealties. And you'll notice I'm playing 3 yellow Bramble Cinderclaw. I think that is part of the consistency as well. I think this card is criminally underrated. It is your resource card. It is your card that turns on your Art of Dragon Scale every single time. One of the reasons you lose with Syndra is because you can't create a fealty, or you can't find a Bramble Cinderclaw in the first 3 turns. That is often your deck falls apart. And I think yellow Bramble Cinderclaw is kind of the perfect fix to that, because yes, you do lose a power, but it still demands a minimum a 2 equipment block, usually a card from hand, to stop the chain link hit. It does all the things that you need it to do. So that's where I'm at the moment.
I was going to go to Brand right afterwards, especially since you brought up the downsides of Pain in the Backside with it not being Draconic. And I see you've gone into 3 Brand, which sort of solves the Draconic issues, which I think, I agree with you, is very, very important. And I definitely resonate with the idea that your weakest turns or the weakest games are the ones where you're struggling to get the requisite number of Draconic chain links, or get the cards that you want to be Draconic to actually be Draconic. I do like that 3 out of Dragon Scales. I agree with you in the mirror. It's fantastic. And I also like it into Verdance as well. Because, I mean, the matchup is really, the reason Verdance even gets to play is because they have 9 health on you at the beginning. And this card just says, if you're not prepared for this, if they didn't play around it, potentially coming at the end because they're blocking your mass triggers earlier, and they just get fully blown up by this card, then that's just absolutely game winning. And I think the thing about the Verdance matchup is that I feel like it's come down to just overloading on hits. Just, yes, Verdance is good at blocking out your mask, but not really past that. Like, she can block your chain link 3 and 4, like, very, very well, and still do something on her turn that's significant. But if you get to break that up by sending more than just your mask on hits on a turn, like you go chain link 3 mask, chain link 4 mask, and then you snatch at the end, or you Art of Dragon Scale at the end. Yeah. That's how you tip the balance in your favor. And Art of Dragon Scale is a card that absolutely plays into that game plan. So I'm a big fan of that interference as well.
Yeah,
talk to me about...
I was just going to say, because you brought up Snatch, I think Snatch is the emission. Like, I'm playing 2 Snatch. You'll see them in the sideboard there. I think you can be really careful with your chain enders. And one thing, you just spoke about the Verdance matchup. I just want to quickly talk about the way I've looked at this list from a Verdance matchup. One of the key ways that you win the Verdance matchup is by putting them in positions where they have to do specific things. So you spoke about respecting Art of Dragon Scale, respecting your chain links, and one of the biggest things is having kunai access and the dagger access all the time. And if you can't consistently return your daggers, it is so much easier for Verdance. So that is another reason why yes, Pain in the Backside is very good in that matchup because it demands chain link 1. But again, it's not draconic. And if you find a turn, and we saw this on stream a couple of times in the Calling Sydney, if you find a turn where you can't get back your daggers or it's awkward or it costs you something else, Verdance just takes advantage of that. They can do things like, oh, I know you can't get back your daggers next turn, or you can't do a full Wrath of Retribution turn. So actually, I'm going to use my Stonewall Gauntlet here for value to stop this Master Trigger so that I can keep an additional card in hand to maybe Arsenal a Felling or Arsenal a Light Up the Leaves, for instance, so that I can kill you on a following turn or put you in a damned if you do, damned if you don't position because I know that you can't punish me with the Wrath of Retribution because you can't get your daggers back. So there's just things like that where it is, or, okay, you don't have the daggers, so I don't have to worry about you flicking on this particular chain link to activate Bloodsplattered Vest, or I can hold my Shelter from the Storm as a defense reaction as opposed to having to use it for the discard effect. And I think people are underestimating how massively important that is. Obviously, you can do things like flick yourself with a dagger, all those sorts of things, but you need to have the daggers to be able to do that in the first place. So I just wanted to point that out because I do think people are not understanding how powerful that is. And also the last thing I'll point out is that Art of Dragon Blood is a broken card, and if you can ensure that you can fealty into Art of Dragon Blood into something like your 1 cost for 5 at the end of the chain link, without using your Bloodsplattered Vest, or being able to use your Bloodsplattered Vest for a dagger, for instance, is kind of insane, honestly.
Speaking of 1 for 5s, I do want to talk about another emission, and then we can talk about... I want to go into attack pieces. I'm curious about your poppers. Actually, I'm curious about 2 out of your 5 poppers. And I do want to talk about Attire and Warmongers as well. But the emission, I want to get to Breaking Point. Not impressed with that card?
I think Breaking Point is very strong, but I think players have adapted to Breaking Point. No one's arsenaling. This is not a format where you arsenal cards, really. People are playing around Breaking Point. I just think that Art of Dragon Scale, for instance, in the mirror is so much more impactful. Breaking Point is not very good against a few other matchups, so I just don't think you play it right now. Hunt the Hunter for consistency is better.
We're in an interesting point of the metagame where, because people aren't... people are playing around Breaking Point, they aren't arsenaling, and the card feels a lot worse. But then can people start to take advantage of that and 100%. Actually arsenal more against you because they know you don't break a point? That's an interesting point. But I think we're not too far yet in the other direction. So I think if you're playing against an unknown Syndra at the World Championships, you still need to pick up a breaking point. So I like that take. Call for backup. So Chest Buff, I think, is a fantastic popper for Prism. Came out in Super Slam. I think it's really cool that you basically have it's a 2-cost popper. Whereas when you were running stuff like Blanche beforehand, it felt really bad on a turn where if you draw 2 of them and you need to use one of them to pop, or if you're forced try and send one, it just feels so bad. I have seen Syndras pitch 3 reds to send a Blanche, for example, and that just feels terrible. So Chest Buff, I like as the Super Slam sort of little addition. Call for backup, though. What's the unique part of this card?
We can play 2 call for backup, right? So you can effectively put a popper back on top of your deck, I think is the interesting play with this one. I mean, I don't think you can really cast any of the 3-cost ones because they're just unless you line it up with the blue. And if you do, obviously Blanche is the best. But I just think it's so narrow of a case that I think this card is good. So if you haven't seen Call for Backup before, this is when this defense choose 2 attack action cards with different names in your graveyard. An opponent choose one of them, banish it, and put the other card on top of your deck. So if you have a Chest Puff and your other Call for Backup in the graveyard, you get a popper back on top of your deck, right? Or you go, hey, would you like me to have my Chest Puff, my popper back on top? Or are you okay with me having, I don't know, this Wrath of Retribution on top of my deck, for instance? Or maybe this Blaze Headlong or this Bramble Syndical that I need to trigger off my Arsenal card. So I think Call for Backup is actually a pretty powerful card.
I guess something like Ignite, for example, which is very, very...
Great example.
Can be very, very strong in the end game as well.
Yep. guarantee your
the more I
starter.
look at the Syndra list, the more I'm sort of just seeing where you're coming from about how you're just gonna like slam this deck if you're going to Worlds. Because I look at this list, I'm like, oh, you have your Prism tech, you have your Gravy tech, and then you have your Mirror tech. It's like the tech pieces just sort of like fit in, and you can find the space more easily. Whereas on the Verdant side, we're kind of just like, oh no, are we losing the Mirror too much if we cut these, or can we cut the balance just to add one more thing? And just like you're just trying to like cut a bunch of corners. It feels like to fit all the stuff that you want. Whereas for Syndra, it's just very very clean. Talk to me about Authority of Attire, because are you actually like pitching?
So I think Authority Attire, I have a spare sideboard slot effectively where I think it's worth playing this. I think it's worth playing this card because I do think, for instance, I do think you're going to see these Jarl decks show up that you spoke about. I think we're going to see potentially, Marionette uptick and things like that. And I do think this card, if you get into some of those game states, it is very impactful. And you do pitch at times in this deck, right? Especially with the amount of one costs and things like that. So I've not tested extensively with this card, and it's not a must to play in this list. But I think for one card to potentially have a reasonable impact, I think it is. I think it might be worth it. But the other thing you could also play, I didn't want the third snatch because I don't want that many chain enders that clunk up your draw. So I wasn't going to play a third snatch. I think if I was looking elsewhere, I mean, you can look at my cards I would think about playing. I don't know. I had one shot from the Storm originally in there, but I don't know what I want that against Marionette, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I was just saying that is you're just rubbing salt in the wound even more after I said, oh, Verdants were really struggling to like fit in everything. Yeah. And you're like, oh, I had a spare sideboard slot, so I just threw Authority, and I don't even know what I wanted for.
You could play salt in the wound. You could play salt in the wound if you want. No, get it. You could. I think you could play an additional one cost ender to change out your one cost enders. So you could play. You go to 2 Breaking Point and cut Art of Dragon Scale, or you could play an extra Art of Dragon Fire, or you could play the third Hunt the Hunter potentially. So I think you could use that spot as an interchangeable ender slot.
And I take it you weren't convinced by the Lynx package?
I don't think it's good, no.
Okay. Warmongers, just want to shout that out. I think that's awesome. I think Syndra, while you are favored into the best gravies who know how to maximize the prismatic ley lines, like you're favored, you're not that favored. Put Warmongers in your deck, now you're very favored. So big fan of that card.
Yep. I think Warmongers against the best gravy players, Warmongers against Dash.io, Vincent, like it just turns your like one of your worst matchups in Vincent into just like honestly just a good matchup. And I don't think Vincent's a good deck, so it's kind of whatever, but there is a bit of splash damage there. I don't think we're gonna have time to go through Gravy and Prism, but I just thought just quickly to talk about, you can go and check these deck lists out in your own leisure that I've put up here. They are in the description. But just quickly on Gravy, I can talk about some thoughts. I don't really have too many differing thoughts to what we've seen from like Justin Koo, for instance, who's been an advocate of Gravy all this time. I do think if you're going to take Gravy to this event, I think Loan Shark is your best friend. Honestly, I do think that card has been underplayed. People have been playing like one copy of it. I think I would play 2 to 3. I think just consistency wise, you don't play them necessarily in all matchups. I do think that players are not playing enough red attack actions to leverage how broken Prismatic Leyline is. I went with Swiftwater Sloop in mine. I think you can play red Saltwater Swell potentially as well. And I know the more reds you put in, the less you hit off Swell and those sorts of things, but I do think that Prismatic Leyline is kind of busted and is how you beat your bad matchups. So, yeah. That's my main thoughts on Gravy. Oh,
cool. I guess I'll just say Gravy has definitely fully become a Prismatic Leyline deck. I just feel like that is not what the deck is. It used to be he's like a tipple, draw 20 cards of gold, but now he is the Prismatic Leyline deck, and that's how he gets it. That feels like every time the Gravy starts a Prismatic Leyline, I'm like, oh no. I just feel like a sense of fear. On the other side, I just feel like the most powerful thing the deck does now. I mean, of course, stuff like Rigor Mortis as well. Like, he just naturally has advantage into like something like KO, for example, because Rigor Mortis is just impossible for the deck to deal with cleanly. So he still has those ally shenanigans there. But yeah, it does feel like the biggest draw to the deck is stuff like Leyline Conqueror, or like Conqueror Ally, for example. Not too much to add on Gravy as well. I do want to make sure we get to touch on LL. I didn't know we have. This has been going for quite a while already. But we should at least touch on LL before
Let's move on then.
Before we sign off.
Let's move on. I'll throw it over to you to touch on LL then.
Okay, cool. So we have this last weekend's LL ProQuest. So 2 weeks after the bans, we have Bravo Star of the Show at 2 wins, and then we have the deck that I've been talking about for a little bit, Hayden, which is Marlin, showing up at also 2 wins, sharing that place with Starvo, and then a few other 1 winners with Dash.io, Prism, Sculptor of Arclight, OG Prism, Viserai, and 1 Lexi as well. So ostensibly, again, I can't read too much into this because it's a very small sample size, but Prism and Lexi both showing up potentially. I think we've been finding internally that there is more to explore in the LL format. I think the heroes like Prism and Lexi showing up on the leaderboard at all, I think just gives more credence to that fact. But overall, looking back at the entire ProQuest season, which does include the part of ProQuest season before the bans, we have Viserai leading the pack at 10 wins, Bravo Stop the Show at 9, and Chain at 6.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the final results it's so all over the place because of the 2 lots of changes to the format that we've had through this ProQuest season. So I think it's really hard to read into. But I do think last week's results, again, I also just find it so hard to read into because how many players are playing these events? Anecdotally, I know that these events have been smaller than most ProQuest, things like that. So I just struggle to read too much into the data. And I think instead what is more interesting to me is just will players default to Viserai and Bravo because they seem to be the 2 most naturally powerful, or will we see a host of things show up? Marlins, Dash.io's, Lexi's, Prisms, Dromice, because...
I expect... Sorry, go on.
Just because, the format's opened up for them.
Yeah, I expect a bit of a wider meta game. I think people are discovering things. I think there is a little bit of a buzz happening on social media right now about the LL format, and I think there's more and more, shall we say, agreement between some of the players who are preparing for LL, agreement regarding the depth and complexity in the format and the variety of heroes, and simply because we don't have weeks and weeks of really solid data in the format, I think people are sort of being left to their own devices to a certain extent, almost like, I don't say like, maybe playing like partially blind into like what exactly other people are doing, and like the most prominent lists, for example, like Verdance, for example, we now know a lot of players are moving away from Pulsing Aether and going towards Autumn's Touch and Red Firing Spirit. That's something like we know because we have these top players' data. We don't have the equivalent when it comes to like the top Viserai lists. Like how many reduced to Rune Chant are these Viserai's playing? Are they on the full Galaxia Blessing of a Cult type plan? Same for like Bravo Star of the Show. We don't have these things, and I think that just leads to a little bit more of an open meta game, because stuff like that can change how you feel about the Marlin Starvo matchup, right? If you're like, oh, my internal Starvers, the Starvers I'm testing with, are running a bunch of Turn Timbers. Oh, this feels really bad. Oh, but these other team Starvers might not be running that, for example. And because we don't have these top lists to like sort of converge on,
the gauntlet list,
you could have very you could have differing opinions on some of these matchups because they're missing or are including these tech cards. So I think we can have a less narrow of a metagame on the LL side of things. Unless people, to your point, were just sick of it and lazy and just defaulted Viserai and Starvo. I suppose that could happen.
It's not even sick of it and lazy. It's just a fact of like what is known and what is unknown, to your point, and the safer options being potentially Viserai and Bravo because of the just sheer power. That's kind of where I landed. So...
Viserai, I still expect Viserai to be most represented, and I think, to your point, if a player wants to focus more on CC, then you can just default to Viserai and be very happy with your pick.
Yep. Okay. Let's round out the pod with some predictions, Pankaj, as we always do for these Tier 4 events. So I want to start with metagame prediction. What are you predicting for the metagame split at the World Championships?
So I had, honestly, a week ago, it's wild how much my prediction has changed in just 1 week. Last week, I said we were going to see a repeat of Barcelona, where Icelander was the most represented deck, but Fi took it down. I was going to say Verdance is most represented because all these top players are moving over to Verdance, but Draconic Ninja will take down the event. That was my prediction literally last week. But now, I think with Verdance's place against the other top heroes feeling a little bit not so secure, I'm back to, I think, Syndra being the most represented, but Verdance as a close behind. So I'm going to put 17% on Syndra and like a 15 to 16% for Verdance. And then Gravy and just under there, like a 13 to 14%.
And then what's your fourth most played?
Prism. Okay. At like 8%. I expect a significant drop off from third to fourth, and I have Prism at like 8%.
So every tier 4 event, the top 3 decks generally make up 45 to 52, 53%, except for the World Championship in Barcelona, where the top 3 decks were about 42%, I think it was, 41%. That's our lowest top 3 deck combination. I think we could be in for that again. I think I have Syndra at 19%, so a bit higher than you. Verdance at 17%, and I have Gravy actually probably around where you do, or slightly less at 13%. I think it's those two, Gravy, and then again we drop down to a chunk afterwards where I agree with you. I think Prism will be the 4th most played deck, and then I think Arachne, KO, and then Acilio. And when I say KO, I mean KOs, because I think Underhanded Cheat is kind of a deck. I'm going to underhandedly cheat, and add both KOs into my KO mix. But yeah, I think the top 3 decks, I'm calling them combined, what's that, 49%? So I think kind of slightly under the average for the top 3 decks, but not by much.
I would go lower. I would say we are at a metagame that's actually very similar to Barcelona, with like the top decks not being that far above the others, and there being a lot of wide variety and almost like personal preference as well. Also, the lead up to Barcelona, where Icelanders just started adding more 6s and 7s into the deck for Dromai, it just feels like we are sort of going through the exact same thing with Verdance over here, which means that Draconic Ninja is actually going to take down the entire event.
I think so.
But in terms of representation, that's why mine adds up to a little bit lower. I do believe we're on the lower end of these tier 4 events with like the top 3, the combined percentage of the top 3. I think I'm at like a 47% with the combined Syndra, Verdance, Gravy representation.
Okay. We spoke about Living Legend already. You think Viserai most repped, Starvo second? Because that's what I had. I had Viserai about 25%, Starvo about 20%, which is high, obviously, but I do think it's going to be very high.
I have Viserai 20 and Starboard 15%, so I'm like 5% lower than you than the other two.
Yeah.
Because I think there's more to the LL metagame. But I think, again, like the more I talk to you, I do feel like there is a very compelling reason for a player of that caliber to just default to Viserai. But I'm hoping for more representation. So there's a bit of a copium on my numbers here for this side.
Yeah, default or just best deck. I don't know. We'll find out, won't we? Top 8. I'm calling 3 Syndras, 2 Verdants. I'm going to drop to 1 Gravy, 1 Prism, and a Kano. I think that's a bit optimistic on the Kano shout. I think that last slot is up for grabs, but I do think it'll be probably 3 Verdants, 3 Syndra, 2 Verdants, a Gravy, a Prism, and something else. Any thoughts?
Should we also do top 8 for LL heroes?
Nah, no way. I'm not doing that.
Okay, so my top 8 for CC, I think there's space for more than... I'm going to drop to like 2 Syndra and 2 Verdants, 1 Gravy, 1 Prism. Okay. I'm going to put one KO in there.
Yeah, okay.
Just because I think there'll be that 1 KO that just has a really, really solid run through the thing, through the tournament. And then, I'll go 1 Marinette.
Okay, we've done it. All right, what's winning? CC hero, LR hero combination, Pankaj.
Yeah, Draconic Ninja is winning. So Syndra is winning, and the LL hero is going to be... I really want it to be Marlin. I'm not sure if it will. I'm not sure if there's enough buy-in for the hero. I really want it to be her, though. So it'll be between Starvo and Viserai, and I'm trying to think of a player who's bringing Syndra. I'm going to Syndra Starvo.
Okay.
That's my winning pick.
All right, I'm going to change one up. I said Verdance Viserai in my notes, but I'm going to go Syndra Viserai. I think I'm with you on Syndra winning, so I'll go Syndra Viserai.
Nice. Winning player and team, Hayden. Do you have a guess?
I'm gonna back my boy again, Arthur Trahay. Let's go. I will say Arthur, but I think I'd love to see a champion from Asia. I think that'd be phenomenal. So. If he's playing, I do believe he's traveling. I'm gonna go LPT. Come on, LPT.
Cool. I'm gonna follow in your footsteps of just following on who we were discussing the most in the earlier part of the pod. I'm just gonna go with Pudding. I want Pudding together. I want a blue pitch victory, please. And plus, Syndra is my guess for winning anyway, so Pudding's kind of right there.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah, it makes sense. I can see him playing Starvo and a very aggressive Starvo. It's kind of ninja-like in some ways.
That one he might play something else, but yeah.
That's fine. You get most of your... If you get the winner, that's good enough, honestly. It doesn't even matter at that point.
Yeah, if I got a winner and the CC hero, then, then I think we're there.
Right. Well, that has been a Mammoth Worlds preview pod. I guess, just final thought from me, Pankaj, quickly, is that I think people have disrespected a little bit just how good this Worlds is going to be in terms of from player of the year storylines to just how healthy the CC meta is to Yes, LL has overshadowed things a little bit, but I think, to your point, there is depth to this format. We're going to see a lot of very interesting things. I am going to tune into the Living Legend coverage, definitely, Pankaj, because there's going to be some very interesting decks there to see. So I just think that's my final thought is be prepared for possibly one of the best tier 4 events, if not the best tier 4 event we've ever had. And I'm not even going to be there, so I'm very neutral on this one.
I was going to say I'm surprised or like confused where this disrespect for the tier for worlds is coming from, and I remembered, okay, no, yeah, the LL bans thing happening, and then also the fact that it does feel like it's the same heroes pre and post Super Slam. So yeah, I suppose that's where it's coming from. But I'm totally with you. I mean, we've been talking about this the past like 2 or 3 weeks at this point, where this metagame is shaping out to have so much depth. It's shaping out to be a bit of a deck builder's paradise, and if you're the sort of card game player that just enjoys innovative deck building and the iterations that come about trying to figure out how to attack the rest of the top of the metagame. Like Pursuit of Knowledge is like it's like very realistically a part of like the winning deck list, for example. Like how cool is that? There's all this corners being cut, all these concessions being made in the deck building side, despite the heroes being the same. But these are significant shifts in deck building as well. Like Pulsing Aether being cut randomly, and then Breaking Point being cut randomly, for example. These cards that felt like they would never leave these lists now are very realistically like getting the axe, and other cards are coming in. For example, it just makes, in my opinion, the viewing experience for this very, very exciting, where it's the same hero, sure, but there's so many differences and there's so many little edges you can gain here and there. And then there's the whole LL side of things, where we have the established tops, like we have Viscera and Starfo, but the metagame is still so unsolved. And I think it's really cool to have one side with the CC side where you have a quote-unquote solved metagame, where like the heroes are the same, but the lists are very different. And then the other side, where it's like the metagame is still quite underexplored, if you will. Yeah. And you might have a whole bunch of heroes doing cool stuff. So potentially, I'm with you. I think this is shaping up to be just the most exciting worlds we've had.
Yep. Awesome. Well, if you're playing at the World Championships this weekend, best of luck to you, whether that's the World Championships itself, whether that's the calling, whether that's side events, whatever it might be, Battle Hardens, enjoy, best of luck. And if you're not there, then you should be tuning in this weekend to the coverage, watching along. It's going to be a fantastic Tier 4 event, ready to be glued to that coverage. But that is it for episode 239 of the World's Preview Pod for 2025. And until next week's episode, we will see you next time.